I found a phone buried in my couch cushions. It wasn't mine. When I unlocked it, I saw messages from my son and his wife planning something about my insurance policy and making it look natural. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret, and I'm 67 years old. For most of my life, I believed that being a good mother meant sacrificing everything for your children. I believed that love was measured in what you gave up, not what you received. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. Let me tell you who I was before everything fell apart. I spent 35 years as an elementary school teacher in a small town in Ohio. I wasn't the kind of teacher who just showed up for a paycheck. I was the one who stayed late to tutor struggling students. I was the one who spent my own money on classroom supplies because the school budget was always too tight. I was the one who remembered every child's name, every birthday, every small victory. My students called me Mrs. Rose, and their parents trusted me with their most precious treasures. Teaching wasn't just my job, it was my calling. But my greatest role, the one I cherished most, was being a mother. I had one son, David. He was my entire world. When he was born, I promised myself I would give him everything I never had growing up. My own childhood had been hard. My parents worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. I wore hand-me-downs and never had money for school trips. I swore my son would have better. And I kept that promise. Sometimes at great cost to myself. When my husband, Robert, passed away 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack, my world shattered. We'd been married for 42 years. He was my best friend, my partner, my anchor. The grief was unbearable. But even in my darkest moments, I had David. He held my hand at the funeral. He told me I'd never be alone. Those words kept me going. After Robert died, I made a decision that I thought showed how much I loved my son. We'd owned a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a good neighborhood. It was worth nearly $500,000. David had always dreamed of starting his own construction business, but he didn't have the capital. So I sold the house. I took that money and gave most of it to David to launch his company. I kept just enough to buy myself a small 2-bedroom house across town so I could stay close to him and his family. I didn't need much. I had my pension from teaching and a life insurance policy worth $300,000 that I'd maintained since my working days. That policy was my safety net, and I'd listed David as the sole beneficiary. I wanted to make sure he'd be taken care of if anything happened to me. After all, what else did I need the money for? I lived simply. I drove an old car. I shopped at thrift stores. I clipped coupons. Every dollar I saved was a dollar I could give to my family. David married Jessica 8 years ago. I'll be honest, I never felt truly close to her. She was polite but distant, cold even. But I told myself that was just her personality. Not everyone is warm and expressive. I tried my best to be a good mother-in-law. I babysat their 2 children, Emma and Lucas, whenever they needed. I cooked meals for the family. I never complained. I never asked for anything in return. I thought I was building a legacy of love. I thought my sacrifices would be remembered and appreciated. I thought family meant unconditional loyalty. I had no idea I was living with people who were counting down the days until I died. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm that I cherished. Every morning, I woke up at 6 o'clock, just as the sun began painting the sky with soft shades of pink and orange. I'd make myself a simple breakfast, usually oatmeal with honey and a cup of black coffee, and sit by my kitchen window watching the neighborhood come to life. The routine was peaceful. It was predictable. It was everything I needed after the chaos of losing Robert. My little house wasn't much to look at from the outside, but I'd made it a home. The garden was my pride and joy. I spent hours every week tending to my tomato plants, my rose bushes, and the small herb garden I'd planted near the back fence. There was something deeply satisfying about working with soil and watching things grow. My neighbors often complimented me on how beautiful my yard looked. Mrs. Chen from next door would wave to me every morning as I watered my plants. "You have magic hands, Margaret," she'd call out, and I'd laugh and tell her it was just patience and love. Tuesdays and Thursdays were my volunteer days at the Riverside Public Library. I'd been reading to children there for almost 3 years, ever since I retired from teaching. The program was called Story Time with Mrs. Rose, and it brought me so much joy. Those little faces looking up at me with wonder as I read tales of adventure and imagination reminded me why I'd become a teacher in the first place. The children didn't care that I was old or alone, they just cared about the stories. They'd hug me when their parents came to pick them up, and some of them would beg to hear just one more chapter. Those moments made me feel needed, valued, important. But the highlight of my week was always the weekend. That's when I belonged to David's family. Every Saturday morning, I'd bake chocolate chip cookies using Robert's mother's old recipe. The smell of those cookies baking would fill my entire house with warmth. Then I'd pack them carefully in a container and drive the 15 minutes to David and Jessica's home. Their house was everything mine wasn't. Spacious, modern, beautifully decorated. Jessica had expensive taste. The furniture was all designer brands. The kitchen had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Sometimes I wondered how they afforded it all on David's business income, but I never asked. It wasn't my place to question. When I'd arrive, Emma and Lucas would run to the door screaming, "Grandma's here!" Those moments made everything worth it. Emma was 7, with wild curly hair and her father's brown eyes. Lucas was 5, quiet and thoughtful, always carrying around a toy dinosaur. I'd spend hours playing with them, reading them books, building elaborate blanket forts in the living room. Their laughter was the most beautiful sound in the world. David would always greet me with a big hug and a kiss on the cheek. "There's my favorite lady," he'd say, and my heart would swell with pride. This was my son, the man I'd raised to be kind and loving. Jessica would smile from the kitchen and thank me for coming. "You're such a help, Mom," she'd say, though she never called me Mom with quite the same warmth David did. But I didn't mind. I convinced myself she was just reserved. I'd help with whatever needed doing. Sometimes I'd fold laundry while Jessica ran errands. Sometimes I'd clean up after lunch while David worked on paperwork in his office. I never complained. This was what family did. We showed up, we helped, we loved without conditions. Looking back now, I realize I was so busy trying to be useful that I never stopped to notice the things that were wrong. I never saw the quick glances David and Jessica exchanged when I wasn't looking directly at them. I never questioned why they suddenly seemed so interested when I casually mentioned updating my will last month. I never heard the conversations that stopped abruptly when I walked into a room. I was too trusting, too blind, too desperate to believe that my family loved me as much as I loved them. It was a Sunday afternoon in late September. The air had that crisp autumn feel that I'd always loved, the kind of weather that made you want to wrap yourself in a cozy blanket with a good book. I'd spent the morning at David's house as usual, playing with Emma and Lucas in their backyard, while the leaves fell around us in shades of gold and red. It had been a perfect day, or at least it seemed that way at the time. I'd gotten home around 3 o'clock, tired but content. My bones ached a little more than they used to. 67 years of life had a way of making itself known in your joints and your back. I kicked off my shoes by the door, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and settled onto my old floral couch to watch my Sunday evening programs. I had a routine. A British mystery show at 4, the news at 5, then maybe a classic movie before bed. I was about 20 minutes into my show when I felt it. Something hard and uncomfortable pressing against my left thigh through the couch cushion. At first I thought maybe I'd left my reading glasses wedged in there, or perhaps a TV remote had slipped between the cushions. It happens sometimes. This old couch had deep seats and things were always getting lost in it. I shifted my weight and reached down between the cushions, feeling around in that dark fabric crevice where crumbs and lost items seemed to disappear forever. My fingers closed around something smooth and rectangular. I pulled it out and stared at it in confusion. A smartphone. A newer model, sleek and black, much fancier than anything I'd ever owned. I still used the flip phone David had given me 3 Christmases ago. I'd never seen the point of these complicated smartphones with all their apps and touch screens. This one looked expensive. For a moment, I just sat there holding it, trying to remember if I'd had any visitors recently who might have lost it. Mrs. Chen had come over for coffee on Friday, but she had her phone with her when she left. I remembered because it rang as she was walking out the door. My friend Patricia from the library. No, she hadn't been over in weeks. Then it hit me. David and Jessica had visited last weekend. They'd come over with the kids on Saturday evening for dinner. David had sat right here on this couch while we watched a football game together. He must have dropped it and didn't realize. That had to be it. I was about to set it aside and call him when the screen suddenly lit up with a notification. I hadn't touched anything, but the preview appeared right there on the lock screen, bright and clear. A text message from a contact saved simply as J with a heart emoji. The preview read, "Did you talk to the lawyer about the timing?" My breath caught in my throat. I read it again. The lawyer. The timing. What timing? What lawyer? I felt something cold settle in the pit of my stomach. It was probably nothing. David's business dealt with contracts and legal matters all the time. Maybe he was refinancing something. Maybe they were updating their own will. People did that. It was normal, responsible even. But something about the phrasing felt off. The timing. Not his availability or the appointment. The timing. As if something was being planned, as if something needed to happen at exactly the right moment. I shook my head, trying to clear away the dark thoughts creeping in. This was ridiculous. I was being paranoid. This was my son, the boy I'd raised, the man who hugged me and called me his favorite lady. He would never do anything to hurt me. Still, my hands were trembling slightly as I set the phone down on my coffee table. I stared at it like it was a snake coiled and ready to strike. The TV continued playing in the background, but I couldn't focus on it anymore. That message kept running through my mind. "Did you talk to the lawyer about the timing?" I picked up my teacup, but my tea had already gone cold. The cozy Sunday afternoon feeling had vanished, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. Unease, anxiety, a whisper of fear I didn't want to acknowledge. I told myself I was overreacting. Everything was fine. But deep down, in a place I wasn't ready to listen to yet, I knew something was terribly wrong. I sat on that couch for what felt like hours, though the clock told me only 20 minutes had passed. The phone remained on the coffee table where I'd placed it, face down now, because I couldn't stand looking at the screen. My mind was racing, spinning through every possible explanation that would make that message innocent and harmless. David was a businessman. Of course, he talked to lawyers. He had contracts with suppliers, agreements with clients, legal documents that needed reviewing. The construction industry was complicated. There were permits and regulations and liability issues. That's all this was. Some boring business matter that required legal timing. Maybe a contract deadline. Maybe a permit application. Nothing sinister, nothing scary. And Jessica, she was probably just checking in about something mundane. Maybe they were buying a new property for the business. Maybe they were setting up a trust fund for Emma and Lucas. Young parents did that, didn't they? Planned for their children's futures? That would be responsible and smart. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, needing to move, needing to do something with my hands. I poured my cold tea down the sink and put the kettle on for a fresh cup. The familiar routine was soothing. Water, kettle, tea bag, honey. Simple steps that required no thinking. Normal things that normal people did on normal Sunday afternoons. This was David, my David. The little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The teenager who'd cried on my shoulder when his first girlfriend broke his heart. The young man who'd held my hand at his father's funeral and promised to take care of me. He was good. He was kind. I'd raised him to be compassionate and honest. People didn't just change completely. Not like that. Not without reason. I thought about all the times he'd shown me love over the years. The Mother's Day cards he never forgot to send. The way he'd insisted I come to every family dinner. The hug he gave me just this morning when I left his house. "Love you, Mom," he'd said. I'd heard it clearly. Those weren't the words of someone who would ever hurt me. And even Jessica, cold as she sometimes seemed, had never been cruel to me. Distant, yes. Formal, maybe. But not mean, not hateful. She'd thanked me for babysitting. She'd complimented my cookies. She'd invited me into her home week after week. Would someone planning something terrible do those things? The kettle whistled and I jumped, my heart hammering in my chest. I was being absolutely ridiculous. I was a grown woman, a retired teacher with decades of experience reading people. And here I was working myself into a panic over a simple text message about a lawyer. I'd seen too many crime shows. That was the problem. All those murder mysteries on TV had made me suspicious and paranoid. I made my tea and forced myself to sit back down in the icy living room. I deliberately turned my back to the phone on the coffee table. I would not look at it again. I would not let my imagination run wild. Tomorrow morning, first thing, I would drive over to David's house and return the phone. I'd laugh about finding it in my couch. He'd laugh too and thank me for bringing it back. We'd hug and I'd feel foolish for ever having worried. Everything was fine. My family loved me. I loved them. We were happy. We were normal. That message meant nothing. But even as I tried to convince myself, even as I sipped my tea and stared blindly at the television screen, I couldn't shake the cold feeling in my chest. It sat there like a stone, heavy and uncomfortable, refusing to dissolve no matter how many rational explanations I created. The phone buzzed on the table behind me. I froze, my teacup halfway to my lips. Another message. I could hear it vibrating against the wood surface, insistent and demanding attention. I should ignore it. I should respect David's privacy. Good mothers didn't snoop through their children's phones. Good mothers trusted their sons. But my hands were shaking again, and that cold stone in my chest had grown heavier, pressing against my lungs and making it hard to breathe. I set down my teacup very carefully, trying to keep my hands steady. I wouldn't look. I absolutely would not look. It was none of my business. Whatever David and Jessica were discussing was private, and I had no right to invade that privacy. The phone buzzed again, and again, multiple messages coming through in rapid succession. My resolve crumbled like sand. I turned around slowly, as if moving too fast might make the phone explode. 3 new notification previews were lit up on the lock screen, all from Jay with that little heart emoji. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I knew I shouldn't look. Every fiber of my moral upbringing told me that reading someone else's private messages was wrong. But my hands reached for the phone anyway, moving as if they belonged to someone else. The first preview message read, "The policy is worth $300K. Once it's done, we can pay off the house and the business loans." My teacup slipped from my other hand and shattered against the hardwood floor. Hot liquid splashed across my slippers and the carpet, but I barely noticed. I was too busy reading those words over and over again, trying to make them mean something different than what they clearly said. The policy, my life insurance policy, the $300,000 policy I'd mentioned so casually last month when David asked about my estate planning. I'd told him and Jessica over Sunday dinner that I'd updated my will and made sure everything was in order. "You're my beneficiary, sweetheart," I'd told David, squeezing his hand across the table. "I want to make sure you're taken care of." He'd looked uncomfortable then, I remembered now. He'd changed the subject quickly. I'd thought he was just being modest, not wanting to think about his mother's death. But this message, "Once it's done." Once what was done? Once I died? My hands were trembling so violently I almost dropped the phone. The next preview was even worse. "She's old. No one will question it." The room tilted. I grabbed the back of the couch to steady myself. She's old. They were talking about me. No one will question it. Question what? My death? Were they actually discussing my death as if it were a business transaction? No, 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 no. I was misunderstanding. I had to be misunderstanding. There was context I was missing. There had to be an explanation. But even as I tried to rationalize it, the third message preview burned into my vision. We need to move fast. The business creditors are circling. My legs gave out and I sank onto the couch, still clutching the phone like it was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly turned liquid and unstable. Broken pieces of my teacup lay scattered across the floor, but I couldn't make myself care. All I could see were those words. All I could think about was what they meant. David's business was in trouble. Serious trouble if creditors were circling. And Jessica, my daughter-in-law, was talking about my insurance policy like it was a solution to their financial problems, like my death was a path to solvency. I looked down at David's phone in my shaking hands. I knew his passcode. He told me years ago, back when he first got a smartphone and needed my help learning to use it. He'd never changed it because he said it was easy to remember. 0815, August 15th, his birthday. My thumb hovered over the screen. This was the line. Once I crossed it, there would be no going back. Once I unlocked this phone and read those full messages, I couldn't unknow what I learned. The innocence, the trust, the belief that my family loved me unconditionally, all of that would be gone forever. But I had to know. God help me. I had to know the truth. I entered the code with trembling fingers, 0815. The phone unlocked with a soft click. The screen opened directly to the message thread between David and Jessica. I didn't even have to search for it. It was right there, the most recent conversation, dozens and dozens of messages stretching back weeks. I scrolled to the top of the conversation, to where it had started 3 weeks ago, and I began to read. With each message, each cold calculation, each casual discussion of how to kill me and make it look like an accident, my entire world collapsed. These weren't strangers. This wasn't some crime show on TV. This was my son. This was the boy I'd given everything to, and he was planning to murder me for money. The phone slipped from my numb fingers onto the couch cushion. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart with an iron fist. The room spun around me, and I realized I was making a sound, a low, keening wail that didn't even sound human. Everything I'd believed, everything I'd sacrificed for, everything I'd thought was real and good and true, it was all a lie. A beautiful, terrible lie. And I'd been too blind, too trusting, too foolishly loving to see it. I forced myself to pick up the phone again. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, but I had to read it all. I had to understand the full scope of what they were planning. The messages went back 3 weeks, starting with something that seemed almost innocent until you understood the context. Jessica had written, "We can't keep living like this. The business is drowning and the mortgage is 3 months behind. We're going to lose everything." David's response, "I know, I've tried everything. No bank will give us another loan. We're maxed out." Jessica, "What about your mother?" A pause in the messages. Several hours had passed before David responded. "What about her?" Jessica, "She has that insurance policy. You told me it's worth $300K. That would solve everything." David, "Jess, what are you saying?" Jessica, "I'm saying she's 67 years old. She's lived a full life. People her age die every day from falls, heart attacks, strokes. It happens. It's natural." My vision blurred with tears, but I kept reading. I needed to see how far this went. I needed to know if my son, my baby boy, had agreed to this monstrosity. There was a long gap before David's next message, sent the following day. "I can't believe we're even talking about this." Jessica, "We're talking about survival. Our survival. Emma and Lucas's future. Do you want them to grow up in poverty? Do you want to lose our house because that's what's going to happen? Your mother wouldn't want that for her grandchildren." Another gap. Then David wrote, "How would we even—" My stomach lurched. He hadn't said no. He hadn't shut down the conversation. He'd asked how. That single word destroyed whatever small hope I'd been clinging to. Jessica had been ready with answers. Old people fall all the time. The stairs in her house are steep, or there's medication. She takes those blood pressure pills. An overdose could look accidental, or we could invite her over and make sure she drinks wine. You know how dizzy she gets with alcohol. Accidents happen, David, especially with elderly people living alone. They'd discussed it like they were planning a vacation, clinical, detached. My life reduced to a problem that needed solving, an obstacle between them and financial security. I scrolled further, my tears falling onto the phone screen. David had written, "She gave me everything. She sold her house so I could start the business. Mom sacrificed her whole retirement for me." For a moment, my heart lifted. He remembered. He felt guilty. Maybe there was still humanity in him. But Jessica's response crushed that hope. "Exactly, she already gave you everything. This is just the final gift. She'd want to help you. Besides, what kind of life does she have? She's alone. She volunteers at a library. She gardens. That's it. Meanwhile, we're drowning. Our children are suffering. Where's the justice in that?" David's reply came an hour later. "When would we do it?" I made a sound like a wounded animal. My son had just agreed to kill me. Not immediately, not enthusiastically, but he'd agreed. He'd crossed that line from horrified rejection to active planning. In that moment, I lost my son. The David I knew died, and in his place was a stranger wearing his face. The messages continued, growing more detailed and more chilling. They discussed methods like they were comparing recipes. Jessica seemed to be driving the planning, but David was participating, suggesting ideas, asking questions. Then I found the message that made my blood turn to ice. Jessica from 2 days ago. "This Saturday. I'll invite her for dinner. We'll give her wine. Lots of wine. Then you suggest she get something from the basement storage. I'll make sure the light bulb is loose. The stairs are steep and wooden. A fall from the top would do it. Head trauma. Quick. Maybe even painless." David, "What if she doesn't drink enough?" Jessica, "Then we try the medication route. I've already researched it. A few crushed pills in her dessert. She'll get dizzy, disoriented. The stairs will still work. Or if we get her outside, she could fall in the driveway, hit her head on the concrete. Either way, by Sunday morning, it's done." David, "And the insurance?" Jessica, "I already called them last week, pretending to ask general questions. The payout is straightforward. Death certificate, claim form, 2 to 4 weeks for processing. We'll have the money before the foreclosure goes through." I couldn't read anymore. I dropped the phone and ran to the bathroom, barely making it to the toilet before I vomited. My body heaved until there was nothing left, until I was just dry sobbing over the bowl, my entire body shaking with the force of my grief. My son was going to murder me. This Saturday. In 3 days. They had a plan. They had a timeline. They had already made peace with it. After I finished being sick, I washed my face with cold water and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. My eyes were red and swollen, my face pale and drawn. I looked like a ghost. I felt like one too. Part of me had died in the last hour, the part that believed in the goodness of family, the part that trusted unconditionally. But I couldn't fall apart completely. Not yet. I needed to know everything. If I was going to process this nightmare, I needed to understand the full extent of their betrayal. I walked back to the living room on unsteady legs, stepping carefully around the broken teacup I still hadn't cleaned up. The phone was still on the couch where I'd dropped it. I picked it up and kept scrolling, forcing myself to read every single message. What I discovered made everything so much worse. This wasn't just about my insurance policy. It went deeper, stretched back further, involved more deception than I could have imagined. I found a message from 2 months ago, long before they'd started discussing my murder. Jessica had written, "I found the documents, your mother's house deed. We could use it." David, "Use it how?" Jessica. As collateral. Take out a loan against it. She'll never know. She doesn't check those records. Old people don't understand how property databases work. My hands clenched around the phone. My house. The little 2-bedroom house I'd bought with what was left after helping David start his business. They'd taken out loans against my property without my knowledge. I kept reading, my horror growing with each message. David had responded, "That's fraud. I could go to jail." Jessica. Only if someone finds out, and who's going to tell? You're her son. You're on her emergency contact forms. It's not hard to forge a signature. I've already talked to a guy who knows how to make it look legitimate. They'd done it. The messages confirmed it 3 weeks later. David had written, "The loan came through. $75,000 against her house." Jessica. See? Easy. And she has no idea. This buys us a few months. But $75,000 apparently hadn't been enough. I found more messages discussing my other assets. Jessica had sent David a detailed list that made my skin crawl. She'd itemized everything I owned like she was taking inventory at a store. Insurance policy, $300,000. House equity, approximately $180,000 after our loan. Savings account, roughly $12,000 based on what she mentioned at Easter. Jewelry. Her engagement ring alone is worth at least $8,000, maybe more. The antique furniture from her mother could get $15,000, $20,000 if we sell it to the right collector. Her car, maybe $3,000. Total assets, over $500,000. She'd put a price tag on my entire life. Every possession, every savings dollar, every piece of jewelry that held sentimental value. To her, I wasn't a person. I was an estate waiting to be liquidated. But the most devastating discovery was buried in a message from 4 days ago. Jessica had written to David, "I did more digging. Your mother's pension continues for 6 months after death as a survivor benefit, because your dad worked for the state. That's another $18,000 we can claim if we move fast. You just have to file the paperwork before they process the death certificate fully." They were going to steal my pension too. Money that was supposed to sustain me through my retirement. Money I'd earned through 35 years of teaching. Money that was meant to keep me fed and housed and independent. They'd planned to take that too. I found another message that revealed Jessica had already contacted an estate liquidation company. She'd sent them photos of my furniture, my mother's china cabinet, the antique clock that had belonged to my grandmother. She'd gotten quotes. She'd been preparing to sell off my life piece by piece before my body was even cold. And David had let her. Every single message from Jessica, every calculation, every cold-blooded plan, David had seen it all. Sometimes he'd objected weakly, but he'd never stopped her. He'd never said, "This is too far," or "We can't do this to my mother." He just watched as his wife turned his mother into a balance sheet. Then I found the message that broke me completely. It was from last week. Jessica had written, "I saw her at the grocery store today. She was buying ingredients to make that pot roast she always brings us. She was smiling and humming to herself. She looked so happy, so clueless." David, Don't make this harder." Jessica, "I'm not. I'm just saying it'll be a mercy in a way. She's alone. She has no real purpose. At least this way her death will mean something. It'll save her grandchildren's future. That's more than most people get." They'd convinced themselves they were doing me a favor. They'd reframed my murder as an act of mercy, a final contribution to the family I'd already given everything to. They'd taken my love, my sacrifice, my endless generosity, and they'd twisted it into justification for killing me. I sat there on my couch, surrounded by the broken pieces of my teacup and the shattered remains of my family, and I realized something that cut deeper than fear, deeper than grief. They didn't just want me dead. They'd already erased me in their minds. I was already gone to them, already reduced to assets and insurance payouts. The grandmother who baked cookies, the mother who sacrificed everything, the woman who loved them unconditionally. She didn't exist to them anymore, if she ever had. I don't know how long I sat there staring at that phone. Time seemed to have lost all meaning. The sun had set outside my window, and my living room was dark except for the glow of the phone screen. I hadn't turned on any lights. I hadn't moved except to breathe. I felt paralyzed, frozen in this moment where my entire life had revealed itself to be a beautiful lie. Eventually, the phone screen went dark in my hands, and I was left sitting in complete blackness. That's when the real grief hit me. It came in waves, each one more devastating than the last, crashing over me until I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but feel the enormity of what I'd lost. I stumbled to my bedroom, clutching the phone like evidence at a crime scene. My legs barely carried me. I collapsed onto my bed, and that's when the sobs came. Great heaving gasps that shook my entire body. I cried until my throat was raw, until my chest ached, until I had no tears left and could only lie there making broken animal sounds of pure anguish. My mind kept replaying memories, but now they were all poisoned. Every happy moment had become a scene from a horror movie where the audience knows the truth, but the victim doesn't. I saw David as a little boy, maybe 5 years old, running to me with a dandelion he'd picked. "For you, Mommy," he'd said with such pure joy. I'd kept that wilted flower in a book for years. Where was that boy now? When had he died and been replaced by this stranger who could plot his mother's murder? I remembered teaching him to tie his shoes, sitting on the floor of our old house with his small feet in my lap. Bunny ears, remember? Loop and pull. He'd been so frustrated, his little face scrunched up in concentration. I'd been so patient, so loving. I would have sat there all day if that's what he needed. I remembered thinking, I would do anything for this child, anything. And I had. I'd given him everything. I saw him at 8 years old crying because kids at school had bullied him. I'd held him and told him he was special, that he was kind and good, and that kindness was a strength, not a weakness. I'd believed that. I'd raised him to be compassionate. What had gone wrong? Where had I failed? The memories kept coming, relentless and cruel. David at 16, after he crashed my car. He'd been terrified I'd be angry, but I just hugged him and said, "Cars can be replaced, you can't." David at 23, nervous and sweating as he asked for money to start his business. I'd said yes without hesitation, had sold the house that held 40 years of memories because I believed in him, because I loved him. David at his wedding introducing me to Jessica. "Mom, this is the woman I'm going to marry." I'd welcomed her with open arms, had tried so hard to make her feel like family, had bent over backwards to be the mother-in-law she needed. And all along, had she been evaluating my worth, calculating my assets, waiting for the right moment to cash in? I thought about Emma and Lucas, my beautiful grandchildren. I'd rocked them as babies, changed their diapers, sung them lullabies. I'd been there for their first steps, their first words. Emma had called me Gamma before she could say Grandma properly, and the nickname had stuck. Lucas would curl up in my lap and fall asleep during story time, his little hand clutching my sweater. What would they tell those children about me after I was gone? Would they say Grandma had an accident? Would they pretend to grieve at my funeral while secretly celebrating the insurance payout? Would Emma and Lucas grow up thinking their grandmother had simply gotten old and clumsy, never knowing their parents had murdered me? Or worse, would they simply forget me? Would I become a dim memory, a photograph on a shelf, a name mentioned occasionally at family gatherings? Oh yes, Grandma Margaret. She died when you were young. Such a shame. I grabbed the picture frame from my nightstand, the one with the photo from last Christmas, all of us together, smiling at the camera. David had his arm around my shoulders. Jessica was holding Lucas. Emma was making a silly face. We looked like a normal, happy family. We looked like people who loved each other. I hurled the frame across the room. It hit the wall and shattered, glass exploding across my bedroom floor. But it didn't make me feel better. Nothing could make this better. I looked at the other photos scattered around my bedroom. My wedding day with Robert, David's high school graduation, family vacations, birthday parties, 42 years of memories, of love, of sacrifice. And for what? So my son could murder me for $300,000? So my daughter-in-law could sell my mother's furniture to pay off credit cards. I had given them everything. My money, my time, my unconditional love. I had made myself small and quiet and accommodating because I thought that's what good mothers did. I thought if I just loved them enough, sacrificed enough, gave enough, they would value me. They would cherish me. But I'd been wrong. I hadn't raised my value in their eyes. I just made myself easier to erase. I curled into a ball on my bed, clutching David's phone to my chest like it was the only real thing left in the world. Outside my window, I could hear the normal sounds of the neighborhood. A dog barking, a car driving past, someone laughing in the distance. The world was continuing like nothing had changed, like my entire existence hadn't just been shattered into a million irreparable pieces. How does a person survive this? How do you keep breathing when the people you loved most in the world, the people you would have died for, are actively planning to kill you? I didn't have an answer. All I had was darkness, grief, and a phone full of evidence that my family had never really loved me at all. I don't know what time I finally stopped crying. The room was still dark and my body felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left only an empty shell. I lay there on my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of my small house. This was my life now. Alone in the dark, surrounded by shattered picture frames and broken dreams. But then slowly, something began to shift inside me. It started as a spark, small and flickering, somewhere deep in my chest where the grief had carved out a cavern. It wasn't hope. Hope was too gentle a word for what I felt. It was something harder, something sharper. It was anger, pure crystalline rage. How dare they? How dare they take my love and twist it into weakness? How dare they look at my kindness and see only opportunity? How dare they plan my murder and convince themselves it was mercy, that I was already so worthless, so purposeless, that killing me was practically a favor? I sat up slowly, my body aching from hours of crying. The anger was growing now, spreading through my veins like fire, burning away the paralysis that had held me frozen. I stood up and walked to my bathroom, flipping on the light. The sudden brightness made me squint, but I forced myself to look in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked destroyed. Her eyes were swollen and red. Her gray hair was a mess. Her face was pale and haggard. She looked exactly like what David and Jessica thought she was. A helpless old woman, a victim, an easy target. But as I stared at my reflection, I saw something else beneath the grief. I saw the woman who had survived 35 years in a public school system that tried to break teachers down year after year. I saw the woman who had raised a child alone, while working full-time after her husband's work kept him away for weeks. I saw the woman who had buried the love of her life and kept going when it would have been easier to give up. I saw a survivor. I was 67 years old. I had lived through poverty, loss, heartbreak, and disappointment. I had been tested by life in ways most people never experienced, and I was still standing. I was still here. Yes, I was old, but old didn't mean weak. Old didn't mean finished. Old meant experienced, battle-tested, stronger than anyone gave me credit for. David and Jessica thought I was just a fragile old lady, someone they could eliminate with a push down the stairs and a fake sob at the funeral. They thought I was helpless, clueless, already half gone. They had mistaken my kindness for stupidity, my generosity for blindness, my love for weakness. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I I splashed cold water on my face and dried it roughly with a towel. My hands had stopped shaking. My breathing had steadied. The grief was still there, a boulder sitting on my chest that would probably never fully go away. But alongside it now was something else. Purpose. Determination. A cold, calculated fury that sharpened my mind and cleared away the fog of shock. I walked back to my bedroom and picked up David's phone from where I'd left it on the bed. The screen lit up in my hands, showing the time, 11:47 p.m. Sunday night. They were planning to kill me on Saturday. That gave me 6 days. 6 days to turn the tables. 6 days to become the hunter instead of the prey. 6 days to show them that underestimating Margaret Rose was the biggest mistake they would ever make. I opened the message thread again, but this time I didn't read it with horror and grief. I read it with a strategist's eye. Evidence. This was all evidence. Every message, every calculation, every cold-blooded plan they'd discussed. They documented their entire conspiracy in writing, probably thinking they were safe because it was David's phone, because I was just a technologically illiterate old woman who wouldn't know how to find it. Another mistake. I began taking screenshots, my fingers moving with steady precision. Every message, every detail, every piece of their plan. I saved them all to the phone's photo gallery. Then I opened David's email app. He was logged in automatically, another gift from his carelessness. And I emailed every screenshot to my own email address. Insurance, multiple copies. I wasn't going to let any evidence disappear. As I worked, my mind was already racing ahead, building a plan. I couldn't just go to the police with a phone that wasn't mine and messages that could theoretically be faked. I needed more. I needed them to incriminate themselves in a way that was undeniable, irrefutable, impossible to explain away. I needed to let them try. The thought should have terrified me. I should have been planning to run, to hide, to get as far away from them as possible. Any rational person would have packed a bag and disappeared. But I wasn't going to run. I was going to do something far more dangerous. I was going to walk straight into their trap, and I was going to make sure that when it snapped shut, they were the ones caught inside it. A grim smile crossed my face, the first smile I'd managed since finding that phone. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. They wanted to see a helpless old lady. Fine. I would give them exactly what they expected. I would play my role perfectly. And then, when they thought they'd won, when they thought they were moments away from their payday, I would rip away the mask and show them the truth. I wasn't their victim. I was their reckoning. I looked at my reflection one more time. You gave them life, I whispered to myself. Now you're going to teach them about consequences. Tomorrow, I would start preparing. I would be methodical, careful, thorough. I would build my case brick by brick until it was unassailable. And on Saturday night, when David and Jessica thought they were executing their plan, they would discover they'd been dancing to my tune all along. They wanted to kill Margaret Rose, the devoted mother, the sacrificial grandmother, the woman who gave everything and asked for nothing. That woman was already dead. They'd killed her with their greed and betrayal. But what rose from her ashes was something they'd never expected and weren't prepared to face. Not a victim, a warrior. And this warrior was done being merciful. Monday morning arrived with pale sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. I'd barely slept, but I didn't feel tired. I felt alert, focused, alive in a way I hadn't in years. I had work to do, and failure wasn't an option. I made myself a strong pot of coffee and sat at my kitchen table with a notepad, creating a checklist like I used to do when planning complicated lesson units. Except this time, I wasn't teaching children about history. I was teaching my son and his wife about justice. First priority, legal counsel. I needed a lawyer, someone sharp and trustworthy who would believe me and help me navigate this nightmare. I thought immediately of Rachel Winters, a young attorney who volunteered at the library's literacy program. She was in her early 30s, brilliant and had a reputation for taking on difficult cases. I'd helped her daughter learn to read 2 years ago, and we'd stayed friendly ever since. Rachel owed me nothing, but I hoped she'd remember our connection. I called her office at 9 o'clock sharp. When her assistant tried to schedule me for next week, I said 5 words that got me an immediate appointment. It's a matter of life and death. Rachel agreed to see me at 11. Her office was in a modest building downtown. When I arrived carrying David's phone and a folder of printed screenshots, Rachel took one look at my face and closed her office door. "Margaret, what's wrong? You look like you haven't slept." I sat down across from her and said very calmly, "My son and his wife are planning to murder me this Saturday. I need your help." To her credit, Rachel didn't laugh or dismiss me. She listened. I showed her everything: the messages, the timeline, the detailed planning, the conspiracy to commit fraud against my house. As she read, her expression shifted from concern to horror to cold fury. When she finished, she looked up at me with fire in her eyes. "We're going to destroy them," she said simply. "Tell me what you need." We spent 2 hours crafting a strategy. Rachel made copies of everything and secured them in her office safe. She explained that we needed to catch them in the act, that conspiracy charges were stronger when coupled with attempted murder. She contacted Detective James Morrison, a family friend who'd gone to high school with Robert. Within an hour, Detective Morrison was in Rachel's office, reading through the evidence with a jaw so tight I could see the muscles working. "Margaret, I've known you for 40 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to make sure these people never see daylight again. But we have to do this right. We follow the law to the letter, or a good defense attorney might get them off on technicalities." We mapped out Saturday night like a military operation. Detective Morrison would be positioned outside David and Jessica's house in an unmarked car. I would wear a wire, a small recording device that Rachel said was legal in our state, as long as one party to the conversation consented. That party was me. Every word they said would be recorded, every action documented, but that wasn't enough. Rachel suggested something else. We need to bait them into confessing on tape. Get them to talk about their plan. The more they say in their own words, the harder it is for them to claim the messages were taken out of context. I nodded slowly. I can do that. I can make them feel safe enough to talk. After leaving Rachel's office, I went straight to my bank. I met with the manager, a woman named Patricia whom I'd known for 15 years. I explained that I suspected fraud involving my property. She pulled up my accounts and within minutes confirmed my worst fears. There was indeed a loan against my house that I'd never authorized. $75,000. The signature on the documents looked like mine but wasn't. Patricia's face went white. "Margaret, this is serious fraud. We need to report this immediately." "I will," I promised. "But not yet. Not until Saturday. I need to catch them red-handed with something much bigger than loan fraud." Patricia didn't understand, but she flagged my accounts for investigation and printed out copies of all the fraudulent documents. More evidence. More nails in their coffin. My next stop was the insurance company. I met with an agent and explained very carefully that I had reason to believe someone might try to make a fraudulent claim on my life insurance policy. The agent, a middle-aged man named Tom, looked alarmed. I showed him enough of the message thread to convince him this was serious. He immediately placed a fraud alert on my policy and noted in the system that any death claim should be investigated thoroughly before any payout was made. "Mrs. Rose, if someone is planning what you're suggesting, you need to go to the police immediately." "I already have," I assured him. "This is just precautionary." By Tuesday afternoon, I had my legal team in place, my evidence secured in multiple locations, and my insurance protected. But I needed one more thing: a way to record what happened on Saturday without relying solely on the wire. Technology could fail. I needed backup. I went to an electronics store and bought a small camera disguised as a picture frame. The young man helping me showed me how it worked. It looked like an ordinary 5x7 photo frame, but it contained a hidden camera that could record for up to 8 hours on a rechargeable battery. It connected to a phone app where I could watch the footage in real time or review it later. It's popular with people who want to monitor babysitters or home health aides, the clerk explained. Perfect, I said, thinking grimly that I was monitoring something far more sinister than a babysitter. I bought 2 of them, just to be safe. Wednesday morning, I did something that took every ounce of acting ability I possessed. I called David. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, my voice warm and cheerful, the same voice I'd used for 42 years when talking to my son. "I found your phone in my couch cushions. You must have dropped it last weekend. I wanted to let you know I have it safe for you." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear his panic. Then, carefully controlled, "Oh, thanks, Mom. That's great. I've been looking everywhere for it. I figured I'll bring it when I come for dinner on Saturday. Jessica invited me, remember?" Another pause. "Right, Saturday. We're looking forward to it." Liar, monster, murderer. "Me too, honey. I love you." "Love you too, Mom." I hung up and sat very still, letting the rage wash through me. Then I smiled. Let them think I was clueless. Let them think their plan was still on track. Let them believe they were in control. Saturday was going to be very educational for everyone involved. Saturday arrived with cruel, beautiful weather. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the autumn air was crisp and perfect. It was the kind of day that made you grateful to be alive. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent the morning preparing with the precision of a soldier going into battle. I showered and dressed in comfortable clothes, slacks, a soft cardigan with deep pockets where I could hide the recording device Rachel had given me. I practiced walking around my house with the wire taped to my skin beneath my shirt, making sure it didn't show, making sure the microphone positioned near my collar would pick up voices clearly. The 2 camera picture frames were already packed in my bag, along with David's phone. One frame held a photo of Emma and Lucas that I'd printed out. It would look natural if I gave it to them as a gift. The other had a generic landscape photo. Both cameras were fully charged and ready to record everything. Detective Morrison called at noon. "Margaret, I want you to reconsider this. We have enough evidence to arrest them right now based on the messages and the fraud. You don't have to put yourself in danger." "Yes, I do," I said firmly. "Messages can be explained away by a good lawyer. They'll claim it was dark humor, that they never really meant it. But if we catch them attempting murder? There's no defense for that. We do this my way, Detective." He sighed heavily. "I'll be parked 2 houses down in a gray sedan. I'll have backup 3 minutes away. You feel unsafe at any moment. You say the code word and we come in immediately." The code word was Robert, my dead husband's name. If I said it, the police would storm the house within seconds. "I understand," I said. "I'll be fine. I've been preparing for this my whole life. I just didn't know it." At 5:30, I loaded everything into my car. The picture frames, David's phone, and the small casserole dish I'd made that morning. I'd baked chicken and vegetables, one of David's childhood favorites. Let them think I was the same devoted mother, bringing food and love to a family planning to murder me. The drive to their house took 12 minutes. 12 minutes of my mind racing through every possible scenario, every way this could go wrong. What if they'd changed their plan? What if they suspected I knew? What if they attacked me the moment I walked through the door? But no, I'd read those messages 100 times. They were methodical, careful. They wanted it to look like an accident. They'd stick to the plan, whine to make me dizzy, then the basement stairs in the dark. They thought they were so clever. I pulled into their driveway at exactly 6 o'clock. Punctual as always, predictable as always, the perfect victim. Detective Morrison's gray sedan was parked down the street, just visible if you knew where to look. Rachel was on standby at her office, ready to mobilize the moment I gave the signal. Everything was in place. I picked up the casserole dish and my bag, took one deep breath, and walked to the front door. My hand was steady as I knocked. No trembling, no fear, just cold determination. The door opened. Jessica stood there with that brilliant fake smile I'd seen 1,000 times. "Mom, you're right on time. Come in, come in." I stepped across the threshold into the house where my son and daughter-in-law planned to kill me. "Something smells wonderful," Jessica said, eyeing the casserole dish. "Just a little something I made," I replied warmly. "You know me, always cooking." David appeared from the kitchen, and my heart clenched despite everything. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around, avoiding direct contact with mine. Good. He should be nervous. "Hey, Mom," he said, coming over to hug me. I let him, feeling his arms around me, remembering 1,000 other hugs over the years. This one felt like a betrayal of every embrace that had come before. "I brought your phone, sweetheart," I said, pulling it from my bag. "Found it in my couch." His relief was visible. "Thanks. I really needed that." "I bet you did. All your murder plans are on it." Emma and Lucas came running, and despite everything, my heart softened. Gamma. Gamma. They hugged my legs, innocent and beautiful. At least this part was real. The children loved me genuinely. The trap was set, the players were in position. Now came the performance of my life. Dinner was a masterpiece of performance art. I smiled and chatted, asking about Emma's soccer practice and Lucas's preschool projects. I complimented Jessica's cooking, even though the roast was dry and over-seasoned. I watched as Jessica kept refilling my wine glass, her movements subtle but deliberate. Each time I brought the glass to my lips, I pretended to drink but barely let the liquid touch my tongue. I needed to appear tipsy without actually being impaired. After 20 minutes, I started acting slightly. I let my words slur just a bit. I laughed too loudly at David's forced jokes. I swayed slightly when I stood to help clear the dishes. Jessica and David exchanged a quick glance, a silent communication that said, "It's working." The children were sent upstairs to watch a movie, just the three of us now, the real family, or what was left of it. Jessica stretched dramatically. "Oh, you know what? I completely forgot to bring up that box of the kids' old winter clothes from the basement storage. Mom, would you mind? My back has been killing me lately, and those stairs are so steep." There it was, the moment they'd planned. The murder disguised as a helpful errand. I looked toward the basement door at the far end of the kitchen. "Of course, dear. Anything to help. Which box is it?" "The blue plastic bin on the metal shelf, right side," Jessica said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You can't miss it." I stood up, wobbling slightly for effect. David stood too, and I saw his hands trembling. His face was pale, covered in a sheen of sweat. He couldn't even look at me. "You okay, sweetheart?" I asked him. "You look ill." "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired." I walked to the basement door and opened it. As expected, the light switch did nothing. The bulb had been removed or loosened, just as they'd planned. The wooden stairs descended into pitch blackness, steep and treacherous. "The light's not working," I called out right on script. Jessica's voice came from behind me, concerned but eager. "Oh no, just be careful, Mom. Hold the railing tight." I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, illuminating the stairs. I heard footsteps behind me. Both of them were following, staying close. I began descending slowly, one step at a time. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from anticipation. I was halfway down when I heard David whisper urgently, "I can't do this. I can't." Jessica's sharp reply came immediately. "Do it now or we lose everything. Push her. Do it." I stopped and turned around, shining my phone's light directly into their faces. They froze, caught in the beam like criminals in a spotlight. My voice, when I spoke, was nothing like the sweet, gentle tone I'd used all evening. It was cold as winter ice. "Is this what you were planning? Push your mother down the stairs? Kill me for $300,000? The color drained from their faces. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. David took a step back, his eyes wide with horror. "How did you—" Jessica started. How did I know? I climbed back up the stairs, each step deliberate and powerful. I've known since last Sunday when I found your phone, David. I've read every message, every plan, every calculation of what my life is worth to you. Mom, please let me explain. David's voice broke. Explain what? How you forged my signature to steal $75,000. How you discussed the best ways to murder me. How your wife itemized my possessions like a garage sale inventory. Jessica's shock transformed into something uglier. Desperation. You don't understand. We're drowning. The business is failing. We're going to lose everything. So you decided to take everything from me instead? My life? My dignity? My trust? That's when I played my final card. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out the small recording device, holding it up so they could see the red light blinking. Every word, every plan you just confirmed, all recorded. Jessica lunged forward, her face twisted with rage. You bitch! You're gonna ruin us! But before she could reach me, the front door exploded open. Detective Morrison rushed in with 2 uniformed officers right behind him. Police! Nobody move! Jessica screamed and tried to run, but an officer caught her arm and forced her against the wall. David collapsed to his knees, sobbing hysterically. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, please forgive me. I looked down at my son, this man I'd carried in my body, nursed at my breast, raised with every ounce of love I possessed. I felt nothing but disgust. No, David, you're not sorry you planned to kill me. You're just sorry you got caught. Detective Morrison approached me gently. Margaret, are you all right? I'm fine, Detective. Better than fine, actually. I pulled the wire from beneath my shirt and handed it to him. I believe you'll find everything you need on here. Jessica was screaming as they handcuffed her. This is entrapment. You can't do this. She set us up. Detective Morrison smiled grimly. Actually, ma'am, we can do this. And she did set you up. Brilliantly, I might add. He turned to his officers. Read them their rights. Jessica Patterson and David Rose, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and fraud. As they were led away in handcuffs, David looked back at me one last time, his face destroyed by tears and shame. I didn't look away. I wanted him to see that the mother he'd betrayed was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd learned that survival sometimes meant becoming someone harder, someone who refused to be a victim. The door closed behind them, and the house fell silent except for the sound of the movie, still playing upstairs where 2 innocent children had no idea their world had just shattered. Detective Morrison touched my shoulder gently. You did the right thing, Margaret. You were incredibly brave. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of everything settle over me. I did what I had to do. No one else was going to save me. I had to save myself. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of police statements, lawyer meetings, and paperwork that seemed endless. Rachel was with me through every step, fierce and protective like the daughter I'd never had. Detective Morrison handled the case personally, treating me with a gentleness that made my eyes sting with unshed tears. The evidence was overwhelming. The phone messages, the wire recording, the attempted assault on the stairs, the fraudulent loan documents, it all painted a picture so damning that even the most expensive defense attorney couldn't create reasonable doubt. David and Jessica were held without bail. The prosecutor called them flight risks with clear intent to harm. Their arraignment was quick and brutal. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, my back straight, my hands folded calmly in my lap. When David was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, he looked for me immediately. Our eyes met across the courtroom. He mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," but I looked away. Some apologies come too late and mean too little. Jessica showed no remorse whatsoever. She glared at me with pure hatred, as if I were the villain in this story, as if protecting my own life was somehow a betrayal of her. The judge read the charges in a voice that echoed through the silent courtroom. conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, attempted murder, wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. The list went on and on, each charge another nail in the coffin they'd built for themselves. Their lawyers advised them to plead guilty. The evidence was simply too strong. Fighting it would only guarantee harsher sentences. In the end, Jessica received 15 years in a state correctional facility with no possibility of parole for at least 12. David received 12 years with the possibility of parole after 8. The judge's words during sentencing stayed with me. You conspired to murder the woman who gave you life, who sacrificed everything for your success, who loved you unconditionally. There are few crimes more heinous than the betrayal of a parent's trust. This court hopes you spend every day of your incarceration reflecting on the monster you became. David wept openly. Jessica stared straight ahead, her jaw tight, refusing to show emotion even now. I attended every court hearing, every motion, every procedural step. People asked me why I put myself through it, why I didn't just stay home and let the justice system do its work. But I needed to be there. I needed them to see me, alive and strong, a constant reminder that I had refused to be their victim. The legal process also uncovered the full extent of their financial crimes. With Rachel's help, I sued to recover the $75,000 they'd stolen through the fraudulent loan. The court ordered the seizure of David's business assets. Everything was liquidated, the equipment, the inventory, even the office furniture. It wasn't enough to cover all their debts, but it covered what they'd stolen from me. I took that money and did something that felt right. I established the Robert and Margaret Rose Scholarship Fund at my old school. It would provide financial assistance to students from low-income families, kids who reminded me of myself at that age, kids who deserved a chance at education despite their circumstances. The first scholarship would be awarded next fall. It was a small bit of light emerging from profound darkness. As for Emma and Lucas, Jessica's sister Linda came forward to take custody. She was horrified by what her sister had done, heartbroken for those innocent children. I met with Linda several times, and we cried together over coffee about the tragedy that had torn two families apart. She assured me that Emma and Lucas would know the truth when they were old enough to understand it, that they would know their grandmother hadn't abandoned them but had been forced to protect herself. I sent the children birthday cards and Christmas presents through Linda, but I kept my distance. It was too painful, too complicated. They were innocent, but every time I looked at them, I saw David's eyes, Jessica's smile. Maybe someday when they were older and could understand what had happened, we could rebuild some kind of relationship, but not now. Not while the wounds were still so raw. I sold my small house, the one tainted by memories of finding that phone, of discovering the truth. I couldn't live there anymore. Every room whispered of betrayal. Instead, I moved to a coastal town 3 hours away, somewhere nobody knew my story, somewhere I could start fresh. I found a small apartment with a view of the ocean. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and it was safe. And it was far from the wreckage of my old life. In my new town, I joined a book club at the local library. I made friends with my neighbors, people who knew me only as Margaret, the friendly retired teacher who loved gardening and always had fresh cookies to share. I didn't tell them about David and Jessica. I didn't tell them about the trial or the betrayal or the night I caught my own son trying to murder me. I became someone new. Not the sacrificial mother who gave everything and asked for nothing. Not the victim who nearly died for her family's greed. But someone in between. Someone who'd learned that self-preservation wasn't selfish. That boundaries weren't cruel. That saying no didn't make you a bad person. I learned to live for myself. Perhaps for the first time in my entire life. 6 months after the trial ended, I found myself standing on the beach near my new apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in breathtaking shades of amber and rose. The waves rolled in with rhythmic precision, each one washing away footprints in the sand, leaving the beach clean and new. There was a metaphor in that, I thought. a lesson about starting over, about letting the past be carried away by forces bigger than ourselves. I thought about the woman I used to be, the Margaret who believed that love meant sacrifice, that being a good mother meant giving until there was nothing left. I'd spent 67 years building my identity around what I could do for others, how much I could give, how small I could make myself to accommodate everyone else's needs. I'd thought that was noble. I'd thought that was love, but I'd been wrong. Sacrifice without boundaries isn't love, it's self-destruction. And people who truly love you don't measure your worth by what they can take from you. I learned the hardest lesson in my life, that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by loyalty, by respect, by genuine care. David and Jessica shared my DNA and my dinner table, but they were never truly my family. They were strangers wearing familiar faces, predators hiding behind words like "Mom" and "I love you." Real family honors your life, not your life insurance policy. The truth is, I'd enabled them by never setting boundaries, by never expecting anything in return for my endless giving. I'd taught David that my value existed only in what I could provide. I'd made myself so small, so accommodating, so desperate to be needed that I became invisible as a person. I was just a resource to be exploited. But I survived because when it mattered most, I remembered something crucial. I had value beyond what I could give to others. My life mattered. My dignity mattered. I mattered. Not because of what I did for my son, but because I was a human being deserving of respect and safety. Greed destroys everything it touches. It transforms children into monsters and turns love into murder plots. It makes people look at their elderly mother and see only dollar signs. Jessica and David lost everything, their freedom, their children, their future, because they couldn't see past their own desperation to the humanity of the woman who loved them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I made a promise to myself that I keep every single day. I will never again diminish myself for people who only see me as a means to an end. I will never confuse self-sacrifice with love. I will never forget that the most important person I need to protect is myself. I fought back, and I won. Not because I was strong, but because I refused to let greed and betrayal write the ending to my story. I took back my power, my voice, and my life. And that, I've learned, is the greatest victory of all. Now I want to ask you something. What would you do if you discovered your own family was planning something like this? Would you call the police immediately, or would you set a trap like I did? Would you be able to forgive them, or would you do exactly what I did? Let me know in the comments below what you think. I read every single comment, and I want to hear your perspective. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about family, trust, and survival, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who might be sacrificing too much of themselves for people who don't appreciate it. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful true stories about real people facing impossible situations. Remember this, your life has value beyond what you can give to others. Never, ever forget that. You don't owe anyone your safety, your dignity, or your life, no matter how much you love them. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is save yourself. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.